Gordon Videll, welcome to the podcast. For full disclosure, I think you're the first attorney I've ever had on my podcast, I believe. And you are a local attorney here in Connecticut. So you and I know each other. We work together. And so I just want to make that statement up front so everybody has that disclosure. But for people that don't know you, you've been an attorney for how long? Tell us how many years here in Connecticut. You've got a radio show. Just give us the 30-second elevator pitch of who you are.
All right. So first and foremost, I'm a dad, but what I do in my spare time is I practice law, and I do have a radio show, and my partner is my wife in both of those ventures. I do a few other things as well, but as far as real estate's concerned, I've done over 8,000 closings. I've set up banks with their entire lending programs, and I've been doing this for quite a while, and it's a lot of fun. And very little in law can you do where people walk away happy, but real
Yeah.
estate's one of them. So that's kind of what drew me to it. And you're one of those guys. Everybody over with you. I mean, it makes a difference, and people should know that it really does make a difference who you're working with. And you guys are awesome.
Well, it's very rare that you get attorneys involved and people start having fun. You tend to keep it on the lighter side and appreciate all the hard work you do. So, reason I wanted to have you on and have a conversation with you is, and we could talk about so many different things, and we will in the future. But on this particular podcast, I really want to talk about the social movement that is happening right now in our country since the murder of George Floyd.
Yeah.
And you've seen just so many protests in suburban America, in the cities. Like literally, I feel like every town, every city in all 50 states has spoken their voice in
Yeah.
this movement. And I sat back over that first week and said to myself, like, what voice am I going to have on this topic, if any? And if I do decide to express myself, what place could I be most passionate and actually be a part of the solution instead of a part of the problem? So I started digging into research. I sent you over the Newsday investigation. I don't know if you had seen it previously or not, but before
No.
this podcast, I wanted to send that to you. It was eye-opening to see that on the Long Island Sound, just across the sound from us in Long Island, that 40% of the time when 25 testers tested 93 real estate agents on thousands of listings and 200 plus, I think it was 40 or 260 hours of recorded tape, they found that 40% of the time minorities had been delivered unequal treatment from real estate agents in this Long Island investigation.
Yeah.
One, what are your thoughts on the investigation? And then we'll get into some fair housing stuff after that as it pertains to real estate.
Yeah. So first, let me just say, when this all happened, I mean, I have very strong views that are voiced every week on my radio show, which is on a very conservative station. And my views were not met with open arms by a lot of the listeners, because a lot of times people just don't recognize that there is unfair treatment, and people are calling it institutional racism. And a lot of times people, you think, first of all, there's a lot of ignorant people on both sides taking advantage of this and using it as a platform to cause trouble. So I mean, that's there.
Yeah.
But I know there's good, well-meaning people who don't understand what institutional racism is, and we can just call it unfair treatment because that's a little softer. But the study that you sent over to me is a glaring example of how hard it is, and how it's generational, and how hard it is, or and it's not, I shouldn't say hard, but the efforts that are made by people who have certain points of view, who may think they're not doing anything wrong, to keep like people in the same place, which causes all kinds of issues as far as funding schools and tax bases and living conditions. And all of those things are very real. And this study really, it was striking. But because I'm from New London, and where I don't think there's a more diverse town in the country, to be honest, because if you look at the schools, I mean, it's primarily a third, a third, and a third. And, you know, that's just the way it is. And I grew up there and I loved growing up there. And I moved back there despite many of my friends thinking I'm crazy. But so many of my close friends do live there still. So we see it all the time, especially in real estate. I see, I live in a really nice neighborhood, and very often clients are steered away from those neighborhoods because it's in New London. So we see it in real time here.
Well, let's speak on New London real quick. And there's going to be people listening to this or watching this that aren't from Connecticut, certainly, but there's probably, a town or a city that could resemble New London to some degree locally. And New London, for years, the politicians in New London specifically have blamed real estate agents for steering families out of New London. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I know that's true because every time somebody moves to New London, they tell me what they had to do to convince their agent that they wanted to be there. So it's very real.
And what types of
And I'm
things
not
are
even,
agents what types of things are agents saying to steer people away from that city?
the things you always hear: the school system, tax base, um, those types of things. But so many people want to have restaurants close, and they want, a theater, small theater close. They want all of these things available to them. But oftentimes they're steered to East Lyme, Waterford, Stonington. I mean, we see it all the time, and I don't think that people are purposely doing it. I think that sometimes it's just ingrained that that's the way it's always been.
So, and I agree with what you said. There are agents I've heard um, say that you don't want to buy in New London because the school is bad, taxes are high. Now, looking at it objectively, there, and you can say this about a lot of Connecticut towns, but there are, uh, you know, higher taxes for the product, the house of what you get in comparison to other towns. And you could say that um, in reverse, right? There are other towns where the taxes are way out of control. How should an agent ethically, legally explain taxes and school systems to a prospective buyer?
Well, it doesn't have to be a big mystery. I mean, ultimately, everybody knows right and wrong, and the laws are the laws, and they can be skirted in any number of ways. What needs to happen is there just needs to be an open, honest discussion. And it's not so much steering whites away from New London, it's steering minorities to New London. And I
Mhm.
think that's an equal problem. And I think that's what this study really exposed. They're keeping white neighborhoods white and minority neighborhoods very, very tightly it's very obvious the spot housing that they're promoting, especially when you see how few houses the minority testers were offered as opposed to the white testers.
Oh, in the Long Island study, it was very clear that they were pushing minorities out of certain neighborhoods. And when they showed you the aerial and it was like a main road and it was like, you know, over 75% whites over here, and then, under that line that they drew, and then the numbers dramatically changed to the contrary when you went over that freeway or that line in the neighborhood. There was absolutely segregation that's been happening for decades in these areas of Long Island that they tested.
Absolutely. And think about what happens when that happens. Now your schools are affected because it starts with a larger scale racism, which affects people's college, which affects their earning potential, which affects their their spending capacity on housing. So if that keeps perpetuating itself, of course you're going to have institutional disparity. And anybody who thinks it's not is not paying attention. And here's the real problem. It's very easy to show statistics that show that the George Floyd thing was not a black white thing. There was a gentleman who had almost an identical death in Texas, that was white, and nobody said anything. There was a black woman who was killed, and it was completely a racist event that wasn't really covered much. This was just like a convergence of all the frustration of the pandemic, the racism that's out there, unemployment going through the roof, all of that. This was a tinderbox waiting to happen. And then, the bad guys out there who take advantage of these things and are using it for political reasons through that match afterward. So all of that's going on, but you can see the frustration. And when people say there is no institutional racism, or I love it when people say, oh, my so and so was a cop and he treated everybody equally in the 60s. No, you didn't. Nobody did. That's ridiculous. I mean, that type of stuff is just feeding the flames. So everybody who's out there who's saying things like that, it's becoming a absolute snake pit on social media, because there's people looking to pick a fight, and there's people who think they have to defend themselves, and there's no way to prove a negative. So just keep your mouth shut and listen and be supportive, but be reasonable. And that's the message. It has to be. We have to bring that back. And you and I doing what we do, um, we can do our little piece, but I mean, we can't be in the business other than this forum of educating. You can't force people to understand, but we can hopefully bring people into an honest, open discussion like this. And hopefully they'll see that it's a little true. And that's enough to maybe spark a discussion.
Well,
But
tell me if I'm off base. I agree, and I think you were, and I want to speak for you, but I agree with. I think you were heading this direction. Some of the shaming going online, some of the the combative arguments going on online are not going to get us to a place where this is less of a problem, or we've overcome this issue. I mean, I think it'll always be somewhat of an issue, but where there's real change, the arguments, the combative nature of this topic isn't going to help us solve the problem. And tell me if I'm off base. What I'm trying to do, because I always want to, if I see a problem, I want to try to help solve the problem. And what we're working on here at One and Company is we are understanding, like this Newsday investigation, understanding the problems in our industry, in our small space, creating training around that, having the discussion around that, so that we can impact our little environment, which is real estate along the Connecticut shoreline. Am I off base? Should I be doing more? What's the right approach here?
Well, I think you're doing more than most anyone. And I know internally these are discussions and trainings that you focus on. But this forum, along with your radio show, are things that matter, because especially on the radio show, you and I both speak to a group that may not be in line with this point of view. So
Well, let me
it's
tell you, on Saturday, so Gordon and I are on the same radio station. I'm on Saturdays, Gordon's on Sundays, and it's a CBS affiliate, and it is a very conservative base. They're actually, they're switching from CBS. I don't know if you know that.
I do.
All right.
Yeah.
Anyways, it is a very conservative base. I always, when I get on my show, I'm always like, I don't talk politics. I talk economy, real estate, what's happening here in our local market of Connecticut. I completely stayed away from this topic on Saturday because we take calls, we take live calls. We had a lot of calls on Saturday, and I don't even want to get into the divisive part of this conversation. I want to have a conversation like you and I are. So I stayed away from it on the radio. Maybe that's a mistake.
I don't know. I don't think it's a mistake. And I mean, we tried really hard to stay away from it, and it was
They're not going to let
impossible.
you do that, Jay.
It was impossible. My partner just walked in. Chrissy, could you come here for a sec?
Yeah, to let her jump in the podcast.
Yeah, come on over here. Because we struggle with this at home. I mean, the good part about being married and being in business.
How are you
Jen's getting
doing,
a little.
Chrissy?
Hey, how are you?
Good.
I know I don't know how to get in. Gordon's head is so big. What's going on?
So what we were talking about is what's the right thing to do to deal with the disparity in housing. And so Byron was talking about how he dodged the subject on his show Saturday, and how I was saying how it's impossible for us to dodge that subject.
Yeah.
It became overwhelming. Like every call for 2 weeks is touching on the subject.
Yeah.
And we've tried to steer the conversation in a positive way, and I think we're making some headway, but
people did not want to have the discussion. A lot of people just did not want to have the honest discussion because in their view, which I personally think is limited, it's easy to say, for example, the DA in Minneapolis is an African American. The police chief is Black. We had Obama. So it's easy to rest on those things and ignore the day-to-day that people face, which housing is exactly the place where that would happen, right? And it was really hard to get some people to have that conversation.
yeah. So the question you had was, are you doing the right thing, too much, too little? From your company, you're doing the perfect thing, but from a broader standpoint, because I mean, I'm not saying this just because I'm talking to you right now, but you bring up some really important subjects in a context that people can understand. And that's what everything has to be contextual. So that's why that study was so powerful. And that's why, I mean, everybody needs housing. So
Yeah.
the way you're presenting this, I mean, I was blown away when I went through what you sent me, because it provides us with a better forum to have this discussion that will be more meaningful to people who just want to rest on all those statistics that Chrissy was citing. Because we can cite the statistics about how many blacks kill blacks, and how it's only 9 unarmed black men were killed last year
January
as
1
out of 41.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
all of that stuff is true, but it doesn't take away the fact that the opportunities aren't there for African Americans.
Well, when we hear systemic racism, how big of a part does housing play in that buzzword right now?
Well, until I read the article and we're having this discussion, I didn't think it was as much as it is, but it's everything. It really is. It starts and ends there.
So actually, if you think about it, even if you take an issue like Black on Black crime, why does that happen? That happens because of people's living conditions. And that happens because people don't have choices and opportunities. And if housing, I think housing is one piece of it, right? And then the other pieces obviously are jobs and those kinds of things. But to say, well, Black on Black crime is more, yeah, but why? Where did that come from? That wasn't a creation by African Americans. That was a creation by a system. Whether or not it was well-meaning at the time, we can argue about that, but it certainly didn't work out the way it was supposed to. And there are studies about the psychological effects, especially like in places like Chicago, where that type of housing leads people to feel institutionalized. It leads them to feel that they have no choices. So I mean, that's why that crime is the way it is. It's not, I mean, I guess you can argue, well, it's your fault, right? You got to be better to each other and you got to raise each other up and all those kinds of things. Yeah, that's true, but it's society sort of created that. So, I mean, I understand the rage, and I think people need to be more sensitive to where that rage comes from. I get it. I mean,
Byron, the more I'm thinking about it, and the more I'm listening to both of you, think about this. Think about all the fixes that are required in order to deal with the housing issue that you've identified.
Mm-hmm.
We have an entire school system based on getting kids from out of town to basically integrate the New London public school systems. An entire system, which is the most expensive system in the state per person, which is failing, by the way. And we can talk about that on another show. But that whole system was based on the disparity. Remember the busing throughout the country. Remember all of that stuff. Remember Chef versus O'Neill, where we're going to bus kids in. All of that stuff is because the opportunities are limited because of their housing, where they live. If there is disparity amongst the entire population, and we all get to know one another, and we're not, all those stupid biases that they talk about on, after school specials are out, because we all know each other. And two, we're working together, and you have those opportunities that you would never get in a school that just doesn't have the resources. Good teachers don't want to teach there. All of those types of things. And I'm not saying New London teachers are a part of that, because they're awesome. It's the administration that's the problem. But as you're talking and bringing up this subject, Byron, you've identified the biggest thing of all of it. All of it.
Well, if you watch that documentary, it was, and I know you read through it, but I don't know if you watched the 30-minute documentary. It was mind-blowing to actually see an agent sit there and say one thing to the white tester, like, hey, when can you get started? When can we start looking at homes without having a qualification at all from that white tester? And like with us, we give everybody one free shot. So we're actually not looking for a qualification before we take them out. We give them one freebie, and then we start really pushing on the qualification across the board.
Yeah.
This particular agent was excited, never qualified this white tester, but was excited to push her into seeing homes. But when she had the black tester, she made a statement, I never take out buyers, and I'm paraphrasing the exact quotes in the study. I never take out buyers without a pre-qualification. Doesn't happen. Will not do it. So for agents, how important is it to have a consistent system, the way you do business over and over and over again, and repeat it with everyone so that you don't, I mean, she was clearly like just not giving equal treatment, right? In that particular instance. But there were other agents that were saying things that they've heard in the office they think were right, which was also falling in the bucket of an unequal treatment.
Yeah.
How important is it for agents to have a system to do things the same way over and over and over again? And is it possible for independent contractors at scale to be consistent with how they do business?
That's a great question. And again, I'm not saying this because you're on the line, but you're successful because of systems. You're going to have good people, bad people, they come and go, but it's your systems. It reminds me of the John Wooden story, right? When the John Wooden, who was the coach at UCLA, one of the most famous coaches of all time, he got all these All-Americans, and the first thing they would do at the first practice, he would teach them how to put their socks on to prevent blisters. And it sounds completely ridiculous, but at the end, because everything was systemic and everything was taught the same way over 30 years, you could have taken any member of any one of those teams and had them play together. And that's what you do. You can have people come and plug into your systems and be successful. You'll add more systems to deal with this issue. And I can't imagine something being more appropriate, more important at this time, not just for your success, but to get equity out there. There's got to be equity in treatment. So what you're talking about with those videos, that was horrifying. I mean, those people are opening themselves up for all kinds of problems, even litigation possibly.
What are some of the biggest fair housing and ones that you can talk about, obviously, breaches that you see repeated over and over again in our local market?
Well, the one I always see. Okay. Oh, Chrissy's signing out.
I'm signing out. I have a client. I gotta
go. Sorry, Chrissy. Thank you for joining us.
So, sorry she jumped in, but she was really instrumental in our conversation on Sunday. So the most common, obviously, is in the rental market. And it's absolutely constant. and it's ridiculous. And I don't even know what to say about how to fix that, but it adds to the overlying problem of, you know, look,
Well,
I coach kids from 8 years old up to high school, and I do that in New London, and I love it. And you see these kids, and you just want to give them a chance, right? And we were playing a neighboring town's, and you hear the way they talk to these kids. I actually pulled my kids off the field one time and refused to play this particular town anymore because their institutional response was ignoring the problem. So that's the kind of stuff that drives me and drives this conversation. I'm so happy you asked me to be on this. Um, so like that's the driving force of why you've now got me motivated to push this subject. Um,
well,
but
let's talk about the rental. You brought up the rental.
yeah,
Here's it's a tricky thing, right? Like a lot of times an agent will want to work with, if they've got a listing and the agent wants to list that property as a rental because they didn't sell it. Okay, I want to help my client. I want to list it as a rental. A lot
yeah,
of agents, myself included, don't want to work with anybody looking for a rental just because of the way the compensation plays out. It's actually easier for them to go direct. They'll get better treatment if they go direct on a rental oftentimes. Now,
yep,
depending on who's on the other side, I get that. So from an agent perspective, if you're not really that motivated to be a rental shop, should you just turn down 100% of rentals so that you're giving equal treatment to everybody? Could you have a rule where you say, I'm only working rentals if they're a current seller client of mine first, and it's a no for everybody else? What are agents allowed to do? Yes
yeah.
and no in terms of rentals?
So you have to be consistent first and foremost. That's got to be the objective. And once you start filtering by, town or by rental value, you're really a clever attorney could challenge that as being racially biased, for all of the bad reasons we just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to be careful. I personally think I never really understood why agents get involved unless the homeowner is out of town. Why they get involved um, with rental properties unless they're doing a management job.
Unless they're a
Just
manager, yeah.
Yeah, because the value of your agents on an hourly basis when they're selling versus renting, it doesn't even make sense unless you're doing favors for people as kind of like a lost leader. Um,
So would an agent be legally in the right to say, I only work rentals if they're a current listing of mine and they couldn't sell and they choose to go from listing, sale to rental? That is the only time I'll work
yeah,
a rental. Would you be, if you made that,
yes.
your procedure, would you be in the clear?
I would be, again, anything can be challenged, but I would be very happy to be able to defend that. Yeah. I mean,
As
that
long as
position.
you've got evidence of when people are saying, "Hey, I'm looking for a rental," you're writing an
Yeah.
email back saying, "Sorry, here's a good source. Maybe it's, VRBO, or here's a good
Yeah.
agent that works with management companies or whatever." As long as you're consistently turning down the other rental opportunities that come to you
Right.
with a track record of doing that.
You always get in trouble when you cherry pick, no matter what. We all do. So what you're proposing is totally defensible, and I think that's totally legitimate. You're going to get into trouble if you're going to say I'm going to do London properties that rent for more than $2,000 a month. Then you get into trouble.
Mm,
Um, so I would be worried about those type of things. And again, I think we're kind of pushing the envelope a little bit here. I don't think that's the issue with the rentals. I
right,
think the issue
right.
with the rentals is a realtor not showing to a minority family, and even worse, the the 75-year-old set in his ways, guy who has a duplex who wants a nice white family living next door.
Well, one thing they talk about in the Newsday investigation, and one thing that I have absolutely heard more so in the beginning of my career than, where I'm at now, because I had way more client face-to-face conversations on an ongoing basis. But I have heard clients ask me people's race on the other side.
Yeah. That you can't do. That we know. You can't do that one.
Well, the client, you can't control what the client asks.
I
So
understand.
what's the answer from an agent?
Well, I think you go offline and explain to them the law, or you refer them to me to explain it to them. I mean, listen, we're all people. You're going to identify people a certain way. And even if you do say, even if the answer is it's an African American family, um, if the next,
If you say that as an agent, it's an African American family. Have
yeah,
you just now broken the law?
no, no, but if the next statement is, oh, so you don't want them, or if the statement is they're a really great family, I think they'd be a great fit. I mean, that's where it makes a
Either
difference.
direction.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have agents who are, everybody knows right from wrong. Everybody can split hairs. We have to get past that nonsensical political BS. Right is right, wrong is wrong when it comes to this. And
And part
I
of the
think
problem is,
eight,
right, that the consumer actually has to bring this case, any
yes.
potential case up. It's really seldomly brought up by the industry itself.
Yeah, and it's seldomly brought up by the individual either, because a lot of times they might think it, but how do you prove it? Unless there's something overt. I mean, I have an example right now of and it's not exactly on point, but it kind of is. He is Asian, which in those studies they were discriminated at, I think, at a
19
19% level. Yeah.
19% of the time they're discriminated against.
Yeah. So this gentleman is a great guy. He's got a nice little business where he buys, fixes houses beautifully, and rents. And this particular town came in and shut him down, and then made excuses. And the problem is, in order for me to fix it, I have to get into the town hall, which they're not letting me into the town hall. And it was, so now it's been shut down for months. And the question is it because of his race? I don't know if it is or it isn't, but the excuses they've given me are nonsensical. And it seems just like a roadblock to prevent something from happening. Now they already own the property, and it's a matter of whether it's 2 units or 3 units. But it feels uncomfortable, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. But first, we have to get to the point where we can have the conversation openly. And I still I'm getting sass from people on the other side, rather that it's just like dodgy behavior rather than engaging in the discussion or fixing the problem. I'll take either. But right now it's just avoidance, and that's really where we all get into trouble.
Do you see how many fair housing cases do you see come across your desk a year locally?
I get a lot of calls, but I don't get a lot of cases, and I think people just understand the cost associated with it is not worth moving on to the next deal. And I think that landlords bank on that. I
Mm.
mean, listen. I have landlords. You have landlords. Some of them want a particular type of person, and you have to counsel them again about the laws, and then leave it in their hands. I'm not their rental agent. They ask me a question about what they can and can't do. I tell them, but I mean, I would be hard pressed to believe that none of them discriminate in some way.
Yeah, and again, I'm not dealing with the rentals either, but correct me if I'm wrong. One of the best ways to weed out tenants that you don't want to, or in my opinion, the best way to weed out tenants that you don't want is to put a credit score criteria to applying for the rental space, right?
Absolutely.
Like if you're gonna say I don't want to, and you make it clear in your, you get less leads this way, but if you make it clear in your description, 750 credit score or above only, you're allowed to do that as a landlord.
Yeah, so that is a great way to do it. And I don't know what FICO scores are going to mean after this coronavirus. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll be honest. I turned on my TV this morning and it wasn't working. So I called them and I said, "Yeah, you didn't pay your bill." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I don't know how I missed it, but like I don't know that FICO score is going to mean so much anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, with all the forgiveness that's going to have to happen, but FICO scores are a notorious, notorious tool used against minorities. Um, and so there's lots of ways to play the game, but we have to expand the conversation through. Dude, I am so happy to be part of this show because it is so important. And it didn't even dawn on me where, all of these conversations are happening around me and I'm involved with a lot of the stuff. They're painting statues, they're doing this, they're doing that, they're painting police cars in my neighborhood. And I'm like, that's what I'm focusing on. But the underlying issue is what you're talking about. And that's what has to change. And it's going to take a while, but, maybe some teeth legally that are maybe if given that study that you cited, if we can use that as a tool to maybe litigate some of these cases, that changes behavior. People hate lawyers because they think, it drives prices up. Well, what it does is it changes behavior.
Mm.
You hit a corporation or a landlord in their pocket, they're going to change the way they do business. There's no other way. And so maybe this is a tool to change that. And I hope this gets out to every realtor out there because it is so important.
Well, the stuff you're talking about, like statues being painted, cars or whatever, things are happening to cars. It's all coming from this place of pent up rage. In that Newsday study, when you looked at the raw emotions, they would interview each tester side by side that had experience with the same agent. So they had the white tester and the minority tester side by side and giving their feedback off of the experience of dealing with the same agent, and both of them each time had so much raw emotion from this experience going into the investigation. They
Yeah.
never expected it to be as bad as it was. And
Yeah.
I mean, the white tester and the minority tester both each time had a look of like just being dumbfounded across their face that they just went through this systemic racism, this systemic unequal treatment. And that is the core of the problem, that it is set up for failure.
It really is. So it does beg the question because you have so many, and maybe it's an age thing, but you have so many young people who are supporting this movement right now, and they're over the top in the other direction. I'm going to get myself in trouble with this one, but I don't care.
No,
So they're
no, you're not,
over.
because there's a lot of young people that aren't going to actually put a plan in place to make a change. They'll make a poster, but not a change. And I'm
Right.
100% for protests, but I'll get in trouble and say what you were thinking there.
Well, I appreciate that, and we're all any American is for protest. That's the
Yeah,
basis of what we do. What I'm finding though is a lot of the violence is being promoted by white people, and
that's true.
and they have their own agenda, and we can get that's a whole different show. You can listen to me on Sundays if you want to hear about that. But the question is, how many of them become realtors and what behind closed doors are doing what that study showed? You know, overtly, they are over the top, almost to the point where this is going to sound crazy, but their complete support, undying support at all costs, is almost a sign of racism in itself, in that they need all of that. What they need is equality and support. They don't need craziness.
Yeah.
And so the question is, how many of those realtors are supporting this movement in a way and yet behind closed doors doing this? And that's the danger when you don't know where the problem is, and when you have people who are kind of masking that problem, and that's terrifying. And that's you know they used to wear masks. Now they wear suits and pass out cards, and that's systemic racism. And
Mhm.
they can pretend they're not, but How do some of those agents that were kind of outed in this piece, how do they wake up the next day and not say, "Oh my God, what do I do to change?"
Yeah.
You
Some
know,
of them, some of them didn't even put in a statement to Newsday. I mean, that's just showing the ignorance right there.
right. So, and that's the scary. I mean, isn't that the scary part? I mean, some of them are going to think, "Oh, well, that's the way it's always been done." That's my favorite one, right? Or that's what my clients wanted, or I thought this was best for them, or what, however they're going to justify it. The bottom line is you took away the opportunity from a family who could have maybe made a difference in the future, and now has a trap. They're in a trap because they're in a neighborhood that might not have been the best. It might, but it might not have been the best, but you didn't give them the choice.
Yeah.
And that's it.
I said to a friend, I said, when these protests go away, we're not going to flip a light switch and be living in a perfect world. We have to get better every single day. And it starts from how can you make an impact within your situation, your community, your place at work? How can you start to, because there is a huge impact as you go down the line, to your point at the beginning of this podcast, where if you're not allowed to buy a house in the neighborhood that you want, then you're not going to the school system that you want, and then your kids don't get the education, and then blah blah. It just continues to build decade after decade after decade. And so all we can do is look at our situation. How can we make an impact, and then try to help others have that same information.
Yeah, and that again, not to blow smoke, man, but this is really, really important. I hope if any of your podcasts go viral, this is the one, because,
Of course you do, because you're on it.
well, of course I do. I'm a
Hey,
self promoter at first above all.
I appreciate you being on, Gordon. I want to talk to you about so much stuff. Maybe I can jump on your radio and touch on this a little bit on your show this weekend, or you can jump on ours, because maybe we will touch on this on the radio show a little bit. As I do believe it's an important message, and for our community, specifically real estate, to not be aware of this investigation. It's just not. You have the 12 hours of continuing ed every couple of years as a real estate agent. I get that, but you should know your industry better than anybody, or people like me are going to eat your lunch. And this is an investigation. This is a piece of information that you should know as a real estate agent, whether you're local or anywhere across our 50 states. G, where can people connect with? What's the radio show? Sundays 8 to 10.
Sundays 8 to 10. You can get us online at 949 News Now, just like you.
Yep.
We're 8 to 11 now. They
8
give
to
us an
11.
extra hour. The people have spoken. They want more.
Of course they do. Well, Chrissy's a star.
Well, exactly. She keeps me in line, as you see. And obviously, my office is in Waterford. Anybody needs to call me, calls to me are always free, and they're always generally pretty fun. So you can call me at 860 447-3220. And we have a pretty robust website if you need to get a hold of us.
Yeah, G, you're one of the best. Appreciate your time, and we're definitely gonna do another one of these, and hopefully, totally different topic. But I thought this was important, so I'm pleased and honored you jumped on and shared your thoughts with us.
No, I appreciate you, and this is really important. And I am, if you can, we'll have you on Sunday.
All right, Gordon Videll, thank you. Hey guys, thank you so very much for watching the podcast all the way to the end. If you're enjoying this content, please subscribe to the channel, and better yet, do me a favor and leave a comment. Tell me what you think about this particular episode and who you'd like me to talk to next. And don't forget to watch some more podcasts.